Please stand. My brothers and sisters, our good news this morning has been recorded by John. Jesus says to his disciples, "I am the true vine, and my Father is the vine grower. He takes away every branch in me that does not bear fruit, and every one that does, he prunes so that it bears more fruit. You are already pruned because of the word that I have spoken to you. Remain in me, as I remain in you. Just as a branch cannot bear fruit of its own unless it remains on the vine, so neither can you unless you remain in me. I am the vine. You are branches. Whoever remains in me and I in them will bear much fruit, because without me you can do nothing. Anyone who does not remain in me will be thrown out like a branch and wither. People will gather them and throw them into a fire, and they will be burned. If you remain in me and my words remain in you, ask for whatever you want, and it will be done for you. By this is my Father glorified, that you bear much fruit and become my disciples." The gospel of Christ. Praise be to you, O Christ. Please be seated. Good morning, everyone. Good morning. Where do you find your center? Where do you find your meaning and your purpose in life? What is that source of energy that actually creates in you some level of excitement, enthusiasm? What is it and how is it then that you identify yourself and you see these things then as being part of who and what you are? What is it that brings meaning and purpose to your life? As a minister, I have heard many different stories. Of course, there is always the attraction of wanting material things and to have money. I don't believe either one of those is bad, except for the fact that very often they blind us to some things that might be more important than those. For some of us, it's about family. For some of us, it might be about our intelligence, our intellect. I could tell you as a minister, sometimes it's about being a minister. Not that being a minister means that you're always closely connected to God. That's another whole sermon. But it's a reality. What is it that we find that is our closest connection? What is it that we find brings us meaning and purpose? All the things that I have just mentioned can be taken away. And they could also blind us to other things that are more important. This passage we know over and over again. Okay, I'm a branch. I get it. Okay, I'm a branch. You're a vine. I get it. Okay. The problem I have with this is that we never take this to the furthest extent that it can actually go. See, the fact of the matter is, you and I are not branches of our own design. Think about that for a moment. We did not choose to be identified as branches. We didn't grow up being branches. We didn't choose for ourselves this connection that Jesus talks about here. There is within this analogy this close connection between the vine and the branches. Also notice that the tender of the vineyard is there, the Father, the Creator. But what is it that flows in and through them all? It is the Spirit. It is the juice. It is the liquid of life that goes from the vine into the branches. And ultimately, I think what we are challenged with here in this gospel is asking ourselves, do we ever truly consider ourselves connected to something greater than ourselves? And this is the story and the struggle of the spiritual life. we are constantly evaluating and being challenged to evaluate how we see our lives in light of what it is that we believe. If we really believe that we were this intimately connected, might we say that there is no closer connection between a branch and a vine? The two are interdependent. But recognize too, the branch does not choose to be a branch. It is an offshoot of the vine, which says something about our intimacy and our connectedness to God. So when Jesus comes on the scene 2,000 years ago and talks about this, or as we're hearing this today, it's to remind us that there is ultimately one creator and that you and I are connected to them. And in the meantime, in the course of our life, we could get distracted by the beautiful flowers that we put forth. We could get distracted by the thorns that we are. We could get distracted by, the length of the vine that we have become. But ultimately, in the end, of the branch that we've become, but ultimately, in the end, do we actually ever recognize our connectedness to the Creator? Does our meaning and purpose become focused on something much more profound than just ourselves or our produce, what we produce, the flowers, the roses we produce? Because very often for you and I, we get lost in the fact that we believe that the good that we do is us, that somehow we have cultivated ourselves to become everything that we have become, that all the good that we do, everything that we do that is wonderful, all the things that people praise us about somehow or another are by the work of our hands. And I believe Jesus uses this analogy to make sure that we're all clearly and distinctly connected and that we don't forget our connectedness to the vine. And also, who is the tender of the vine? I have spent numerous hours bedside with people who are passing. It's part of being a minister. The very first week I was ordained, you're at Einstein Hospital, you're at Montefiore, you're never being called, no one ever calls you, because a baby is being born, or that, the family has just gotten a good message that they don't have cancer. No one ever calls you for the good stuff, really. You'll end up going because you're being called into a situation that ultimately is the darkest part of our human experience. But I have found in that darkness of those experiences, this is where people really come face to face with who and what they are and what it is that really matters to them. What it is that is truly their meaning and purpose. And as distracted as they have been their entire lives, at those moments when things are challenging, when death is imminent, when they're up against it, when they know that there is a transition about to take place, in and through those experiences, you and I, for some absurd reason, everything else slips away and we become keenly aware of the fact that we are connected to something greater than ourselves. And indeed, at those moments, we are struggling to try to get in touch with that so that you and I have some sense of comfort in this challenging, most troubling time. It happens every single instant. I have met very few people who are atheists on their deathbed. Because whether or not they believe in Jesus, they ultimately believe in something greater than themselves that is sacred and divine, and they believe that that entity is the creator, and that somehow, at those moments, they realize that they are transitioning back to that which they came from. My point this morning is to ask you whether or not we need to wait till we're on our deathbeds to come to that realization, or can we actually buy into what Jesus is presenting us with today, which means that you and I, our source, our energy, what we need when we are feeling down, when we feel alone. And this is a big part of it. All through COVID and even now, the biggest challenge that people have is that they feel lonely. They feel isolated and alone. And I think a lot of it is because somehow we have bought into the fact that we are distinct and separate from one another. And I think Jesus makes it clear here, we're not. That there is a connection. And that perhaps you can't see it and maybe you don't feel it in the same way, but somehow in the depths of each one of us, there is this connection point to the vine that is Jesus Christ. And there is the life force that comes from the vine into we who are branches. And any second of any day, in any situation that we might find ourselves in, you and I have the opportunity of remembering that connection and drawing our strength, drawing our identity, drawing our purpose and our meaning from that. If we're not looking to these situations that Jesus lays out, if we're not identifying and digging into what is the analogy and what is the depth of all this, what is the sense of having a Savior, it's more than simply the cross. Please, no emails. I understand what I said about simply, but there is an entire world here around what Jesus is trying to present to us, and it's not just about his death and resurrection. There is a program, there is an image, there is a platform for how we are meant to see our lives built within what Jesus is saying, how he is acting, how he is thinking, and this is a mindset. It is a mindset. I was sharing earlier, we went to CCSU, Central Connecticut University. Our son's been accepted there in the business program, and so we go yesterday. And I was really very satisfied with the fact that the school wasn't promoting anything other than what a school should promote, which is education. That was their focal point. There was none of these other discussions, none of these tangential things that everyone thinks they need to talk about because we live in a struggling world and we're all trying to find our identity. We're trying to find a way of coexisting. However, for that school, what I would want for Arthur is to have the best educational experience he can have so that Arthur could come out and make his own decisions when he encounters things in the world because he has been educated enough. Not that someone has placed a way of thinking into him, but that he has been educated enough that he can encounter anything in life and come to his own decisions, right? That is what it means to be a holistic, whole human being, is being able to identify a situation, look at it strategically with a critical eye, and make a determination. That's what school is for. But this person, Jesus, is more than just salvation. This person, Jesus, is about a life here and now as we exist here on earth. It's not just about the end times. It's not just about when we find ourselves on the deathbed. What are we going to do every single moment of our day that is going to make a difference? Do we live in a present experience and knowledge of the fact that we're connected to something greater than ourselves, much greater than ourselves, and that source is always there for us to pull from? And yet at the same time, I hear Christians talking about how they feel lost, isolated, alone, and I'm asking them, well, what is that? Because that's not what Jesus talks about. That's not the reality of this analogy. If this is what Jesus is saying our relationship to him and to the Father is like, then shouldn't our lives be representative of some of this? Shouldn't we be challenging ourselves in our current thoughts about exactly how we see ourselves, whether or not it actually fits into what Jesus talks about? Do we see ourselves as the greatness that Jesus sees us? Jesus points out that we're connected to him and that the Father is tending all things. If we're that closely connected, what separates us? What separates us from Jesus? Why aren't we feeling this meaning and purpose in our life? It's because we are not focused on the right things. Seriously. We're just simply distracted, and we're looking at other issues, other ways of thinking. And yet at the same time, Jesus cannot just be about his death and resurrection. He is teaching his disciples a way of seeing themselves in the world. That's what this is. We are being presented with a way of seeing ourselves in the world, that we are connected intimately to the vine, and that the Father is tending all things, and that blood flow that comes through us, this presence we have, this existence you and I have, is a gift. We are a branch, but we should not be seeing ourselves as something separate from everything else. And when we're feeling down, when we're feeling discouraged, when we're feeling broken and lost, none of that is true. It's simply that we have forgotten what we have been told. We have forgotten, or we are choosing not to believe that this is something we could live by. What's the sense of calling it good news if none of us feel good about it? What's the sense of calling it good news if none of us are finding our meaning and our purpose in it? What's the sense of calling it good news? What's the sense of calling Jesus good news if it does not somehow have an effect on how we see ourselves and how we see the world around us? How do we call it good news if it doesn't make us happy? It's good news. It's meant to be good news. So much so that the eunuch that was traveling with Philip, the minute the eunuch saw water, he wanted to be baptized. He was told the story, he believed in it, it moved his heart, and he wanted to experience it in its entirety by being baptized. When are you and I going to continue to reflect upon the fact that we have everyday choices to make? And we have to be critical about how we're thinking. We can't simply take every single day as a continuation of the day before. Every day is a new gift, a new beginning, a new way of thinking, a new energy, a new vibration that could come through us, a new way of seeing ourselves, of seeing our meaning and our purpose in this world. And ultimately, tell me there's nothing greater than knowing that you're connected to something greater than yourself, and that somehow God has chosen to make you a branch in this time and place, and that we as branches can contribute to the good of all. Tell me there's not something, directly connected to all of that that doesn't make all the difference. I pray that the analogy that Jesus presents us with, that he is divine and we are the branches, will continue to allow us to create good fruit, but not necessarily for everybody else. Sometimes it's okay to create good fruit for ourselves. God bless you.